Hi, this is Robin, and this video workshop today is going to be focused on making selections in Photoshop. Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on using some of the semi-automated tools in Photoshop that are used to make selections. Before I start talking about this and demonstrating some of the selection tools, I thought it might just be good to say first and foremost, what is a selection in Photoshop terms? It's an area of an image that we as users working in Photoshop will specify. So another way to say that is it's the pixels in an image that you want to work with. So when you create an automated selection in Photoshop, what you're going to end up with and what you're going to see is an animated dashed line. Essentially, it's an outline around the subject that you've selected. And in Photoshop, that animated line is referred to as marching ants. And when you see how it looks, if you aren't familiar with it already, you'll see why they call it marching ants. Now, selections can be made with a variety of different automated Photoshop tools, and I'm going to show you the ones that I particularly like to use in this video. But selections also can be made manually. I'm not going to cover that in this particular video. The semi-automated or automated tools are much faster to work with than the manual ones, but even they might require some tweaking and, just cleanup and polishing for the best results. You have to decide how specific and clean your selections need to be for the particular image or images that you're working with, but I'll show you some examples in this video here. Now, in addition to defining what a selection is, it's probably important to know too, what can you use selections for? And to my way of thinking, there's four main categories, whether it's the automated selections that we're going to cover today or the manual ones. But the first one is to alter or adjust the appearance of part of an image. So you're not going to alter the unselected parts, just the selected parts. So let's say, for instance, you select an area of your image and you want to change the brightness or the contrast, or maybe you want to blur it or add some more vibrance or saturation. That's why you would select part of the image, is to make very isolated, selective types of selections in the image. Another way that you can use selections is to create masks. And masks are essentially a map of your selection that you can reuse on various layers in Photoshop to make different image alterations in the selected areas. And it saves you the trouble of having to keep remaking and remaking different selections again. Once you make a selection and convert it to a mask, you can reuse that mask multiple times. So it's a really great time saver for you. Plus, you can alter the mask that you've created if you want to do that too. So a lot of flexibility in the way that selections can be used. Another way I think of selections is as a way to, at least temporarily, form a kind of barrier. So I like to think of it as almost like an invisible dog fence. So, where the dog goes up to it, but it won't cross the line because it's hearing some kind of sound or something it doesn't like. Well, selections in Photoshop can act that same way. If you put a selection around an object, you cannot brush over it with brush strokes. So if you're trying to paint something onto a scene, or if you're trying to alter something and there's a very busy or intricate kind of a subject you're working around, you don't have to be quite as careful going up to the edges of it when you're painting if you've made a selection, because your brush just won't go over it. And I'm going to show you some examples of this too so you can see. But as a benefit, a selection can provide a barrier that lets you be less precise when painting with the brush tool. So that's the third benefit that I can think of. And then the final benefit that comes to mind for me, and it's because I like to make composites, is if you're making composites and collages, selections are a way to isolate content that you want to either move or combine with other images or morph in some way for your composite. So they give you a lot of flexibility just to work with a specific area of your image. So let's move on and talk about some of the tools that I'm going to be showing in this workshop today. So the first one is, here we go, the Object Selection tool, and that's over here on the toolbar. It's this square with a little arrow pointing into it. And with that Object Selection tool, I'm going to be showing you ways to select subjects, ways to find objects. So there's different types of tools that you can use associated with the Object Selection tool. So Select Subject, for instance, is right up in here, and the Object Finder is right over here. So we're going to talk through using some of those with some of the demonstration images. There's also the Quick Selection tool, so I'm going to show that as another automated tool. So again, these are all more automated or semi-automated tools. I used to use the Quick Selection tool to be doing the majority of my selections in Photoshop, but each generation of Photoshop has gotten so much better for the automated tools that now I really rely on the more automated tools to save me time and make an initial selection, and then I use something like the Quick Selection tool to just do cleanup and help finesse the selections that the automated tools make. And the Quick Selection tool is nested. So some of these tools have these little arrows down to the side. So if you right click, you can see the Quick Selection tool is nested under the Object Selection tool. So we'll look at that too. Then we also have some tools that are up in the menus at the top of the interface. So we're going to look at, under the Select menu, we're going to look at Select Subject, Select Sky, and Color Range. And here's the Select menu. And if we do the pull down on that, you can see here we have Select Subject, Select Sky, and Select Color Range. So I'm going to show you how those work also. So let's just get into the demos now, and I can show you how some of these different tools work. So this is the first image that I want to work with. It's a black and white group portrait. Before I work with anything, as I've said in other videos, I always like to duplicate my layer and get a background layer to work on, so I'm not going to do anything that would damage or destroy my original image. So we have a backup copy available I dragged it to the Create New Layer, but you can also do it from some of the file menus. Okay, so we're going to work with the Object Selection tool here, and we're going to start with the Select Subject capability in the options bar. So there's a number of options and tools here, but I'm going to start with Select Subject. So when we go to this Select Subject and click on this down arrow, there's two options that we have available to us. One is really pretty new. You can do your processing of your selection in the cloud, and what Adobe says is that it will generate more detailed results. Or we can work directly on your device, and that's supposed to produce quicker results. Now, the implication here is not only is the cloud option more detailed, but it takes a little longer to do it. But let's start with that and see what kind of a result we get. So to use this Select Subject cloud, we click to make sure there's a little check in front of cloud. And then we left click here where it says Select Subject, and you can see in the center of my little highlighter there that Photoshop is thinking, and it should be generating. There we go. It says it's making progress. Okay, and so now you can see the selection that's been generated, those animated dashed lines I told you about that look like marching ants. Doesn't it look like a line of ants marching? Anyway, so that's why they call it that. So let's look. I'm going to enlarge this a bit so we can look and see what kind of quality of mask that we've generated here by using Select Subject in the cloud. So it looks like it's captured a lot of the people in this group portrait, but clearly we don't see a dashed line around this man, so he wasn't picked up. And this woman here with the white top, we're only getting down to like a bust area, so below there it hasn't picked her up as part of the selection. So that's not the best selection. We'd have to do an awful lot of work to add that. So let me make a mask from this selection by going to the Add Layer Mask, which is this rectangle with the circle in it, and I'm going to left click, and we've made a mask of that selection just so we have a record of it. And this is going to be select subject cloud. Okay. So now let's try and see, because I said the other option that we have here under select subject is to try device, and that's what it's clicked on by default. So we're got that activated. Again, we're going to left click on the words select subject and let Photoshop think and create a selection. Okay, and so we can see here that this time it looks like it's done a somewhat better selection. Because now we can see that the marching ants, the selection includes this man here, and I'm not going to worry about the shadow area under him. It's definitely not for purposes of the demo here to keep moving. We've got most of this woman, so before this was only up to kind of her bust line, but now we've gotten most of her. We're just kind of missing her legs, and we've got this woman and most of this man. So this is a much better selection that we got by, even though the other selection was billed as doing a much more detailed selection. In this case, select subject on device has produced a better selection. So let me make a mask of that too by again clicking on the add layer mask. There we go. And since we did this second, I'm going to just try to move this up here. There we go. So since that's the better selection, I'm just going to turn off the eye on that choice because I think we can do better by working with the device selection. So I'm going to make another duplicate copy of this background, and I'm going to drag that up above there too. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we can use the quick selection tool, which is nested under the object selection tool, to do some cleanup. And let me just be sure that my selection is active. There we go. And so I'm going to put that here, that we're going to be working with the quick selection tool to do some cleanup. Okay. Now I'm going to enlarge this just a little bit more so we can see the edges where the selection is a little better. So let's go over to our object selection tool, right click if yours is still nested to reveal the quick selection tool, and left click on that, and now you can see the tool has changed. It looks like a little brush with a little selection line next to it. Now with this tool active, let me just explain how it works. So my highlighter is strictly to show you where my tools are on the screen, so that's not the brush. The brush size, if you look in the center of that highlighter, is the little white line there. So if I click to enlarge it, you can see that's the brush size I'd be working with. And inside the center of this quick selection tool, there's a plus sign. So what that means is, if I want to expand my selection from what was automatically selected, I would be working with the plus sign in the center of that tool, and I would be working from inside the selection and trying to push it out because I want to expand the edges. If I want to shrink the selection, I'd press the Alt. I'm on a PC, so I'd press the Alt and keep it depressed. Or if you're on a Mac, you'd use the Option key to get your minus sign. So if you want to take away from the selection, if it goes way too far out from where you want it to be, then you would click outside with the minus and on the quick selection tool and push in the edges. But right here, this part of this man's sweater didn't get captured in the selection. So we want to be working with the plus. And you can adjust your brush size so it's the size you want it, not too large. So what I'm going to do, as I said, is I'm going to left click inside the selection since I want to push this out. Oops, that wasn't what I wanted to do. Okay, and I'm just going to nudge it gently towards the edge there. See? And it went out to where I want it to go. There's a slight bit here that was missed. And you can either, now I'm just clicking, you can either slide it gently, or you can just do individual clicks if you're on an edge and you don't want to go too far. So for purposes of this demo, I think he's good enough. I'm not going to worry. Here's a place you can see it where it's gone up off his shoulder, and for this demo it's really not that important, but I'm pressing on the Alt. You'd use the option on the Mac. So we've got the minus sign. So if we want to pull this little lump of the selection back down to his shoulder, we click with that Alt, keep it depressed, and then with the minus quick selection tool, there you go, you just nudge that back down. All right, let me see what else we got. So it looks like even though it's dark here, we've missed some of this woman's hair. So again, we want to add to the selection since it came into her head, and we want it to be out at the edge of her head. So we click inside the selection with the plus sign active and just gently nudge that edge over to where the edge of her hair is. And in your case, you'd be nudging it to the edge of whatever it is that you want to be framed by the selection. Okay. Down here we said this woman's leg wasn't captured. So I'm going to come in again with the plus sign active. I'm going to take the brush size down a little. I'm clicking inside the marching ants. So that's in this area. This is outside, this is inside, because these are the people that are framed by the marching ants. Left click. And now we'll see if it does something funny, because these tones are very close, so it might hop. Let's see if we can get this without it going over into, aha, see, this is just what I was warning about. So if it does that and it goes way too far, then what we want to do is press the Alt key to get the minus and alter option, and then click outside the selection and start nudging this back up towards the edges where we want to be. And the thing about the way Photoshop works is that it starts to learn what you want your edges to be. So you might need to do a couple iterations with this back and forth to train it to say, okay, you're getting closer. You know, it's like warmer, warmer that kids used to play. You're getting warmer if they're getting closer to something. And you just have to keep trying it till it goes. But this is still pretty quick as an automated tool. All right, so again, using the minus from outside, using the plus to clean up inside. And I'm going to quit there just because I don't need to have this perfect for purposes of the demo, but you make it as perfect as you need to be for your, I'm just trying to demonstrate. So again, here we need a little bit, add a little bit to the selection. We've got the plus, we're clicking inside the selection. Here there's a big lump above his head, so I'm going to switch it to the minus with the Alt key and just from the outside press it back down to his head. There we go. Same thing here, this is outside his head, so I'm going to click outside of the selection and nudge that outline to his head. Here we can see that it's missing his hand, so we want to add to the selection there so that his hand is picked up. Here we don't need all this background. Okay, so I think this is going to be good enough. There's stuff missing here. Let's see, there's some of his pants missing here, so let me just maybe try to get them too. So outside the selection, minus, let's just pull this back. And just try to get a little bit more of his pants. Okay, I think this is going to be good enough for purposes of demo to show you that you can, with the quick selection tool active, clean up your original automated mask by using the plus sign on the quick selection tool from inside the selection to expand the edges, and the minus sign from outside the selection to pull in the edges of your selection. Okay, so let me make a mask of that so that we capture that. Now, one of the things that I said that we can do by making selections like this is to alter a portion of the image. So let's just say now I want to make, here, let me duplicate this again. Trying to think of something that would be a good example. Here, let me pull this up. Let's maybe try to make them in color versus black and white. So Colorize Group pick. Okay. So if we go up to the filter, neural filters, click on that and come down to where it says Colorize and click the switch to on to get that active. We can see that now it has colorized our entire black and white picture. And you can see there's some funky colors and there are ways to fix that, but I'm not going to do that. That's not the focus of this demo. It's just to show that you can use selections to alter parts of your image. So I'm just going to say OK and accept that colorization of that image. Now, since I said we only wanted to colorize the group portrait, well, right now the entire picture is colorized. So that's why we make these masks that we do to save the trouble of having to completely reselect this whole area again. So we have our mask. Right now it's showing that the people are selected because the white is revealing or showing what will be affected by any changes or adjustments in Photoshop, and the black is hiding areas that should not have any adjustments made to them. So what we want is to have the background active to change the background and the white active to change the people. Since we only want the people colorized, we want it with the white showing on them. Now, what you can do is either move this layer up to the next layer just by left click and drag. And you can see we've accomplished what we wanted to in terms of the people being the only thing in color. Or I'm going to drag it back down to the layer it was originally on. If we want to make a copy of it, we can make a copy by pressing the Alt or Option on a Mac, keeping Alt depressed, and then left clicking and dragging this up and releasing and making the copy of the mask up here. And now you can see we only have our people in color. So that's a big benefit, is to be able to create a mask from a selection so we didn't have to start noodling around with the colors and the selections again. We have a map to where adjustments should be made. So, and we've now learned we can either just drag a layer mask up, or we can make a copy of it and drag the copy. The reason I like to make copies is if I ultimately wanted to paint out part of this and have part of this not affected by the changes, then I'm not destroying my initial mask. I'd be working on a copy. Let's make another change since we have the mask. So let's go to the Add Adjustment layer, and what can we do here? Maybe add some exposure change. Okay, so we've added an exposure layer. We're going to again Alt or Option click on this mask and drag it up. And it says Replace Layer Mask, and say yes. But this time what I want to do is darken the background so that these people in color stand out better. Well, if we want to do that, right now we're only going to affect the people. So we have to have the mask active with the white frame around it and inverted. So go to your Properties panel and click Invert. And now we have the background is white, so that's what will be affected by any changes we make to exposure. Okay, come and click on the exposure icon. In your Properties panel, which on your computer might be up at the top and your Layers panel might be down at the bottom, but I've customized mine, go to the exposure slider and let's just pull it to, and let's make it pretty radical. You maybe wouldn't do this, but the point is just to show what you can do. So you can make these people stand out a lot. You can get rid of distractions in the backgrounds of your images by adjusting either exposure or brightness. You could, if you wanted to, change the contrast to them. There's all sorts of things you can do. Once you have your selection of the area that you want to work with and the area you don't want to work with, you can create a mask and then reverse that mask or alter that mask to make changes using any of the adjustments to your image. Okay, so that's the first tool that I wanted to show you in this workshop, is the object selection tool using Select Subject. Now, still using the object selection tool, let's go to another image here. So we still have our object selection tool active over on the toolbar. I'm going to duplicate this layer so we don't fool around with that. And the next tool that I want to show you are also here in the options bar as options for this object selection tool. So the first one I wanted to show you is under mode, which is right over here. And there are two modes that you can work with to make selections. One is the rectangle, and if you click on this little down arrow, there's also a lasso tool. So let's just start with the rectangle since that's the one on top. And since what I want to select is this grazing deer, and he's pretty square, he's not too difficult a shape to work with. Let me click, and then I'm going to drag out to create the rectangle. And what I like to do is not go too far away from the edges of my subject. You don't have to be right on it, but not too far away, and then release. And Photoshop does its automated selection, so you can see there what it's doing. So that's created the marching ants selection around that deer. So again, let me use the add adjustment layer, click on the layer mask there, and create a mask of what that selection looks like. Okay, and this is from the rectangle, just so we can keep track of what we're working with here. Okay, let me make another duplicate layer here, and this time let's try the mode that's right below the rectangle, which is the lasso tool. And what the lasso tool does is it's a freehand way to draw. So if you have a subject that you're working with in your image that's maybe not quite as square or rectangular as this, you can left click and just start dragging a lasso around your subject. And again, I like to stay close but not too close to the edges, just to help Photoshop not have to think quite as much. And whenever you're drawing like this, you want to be sure you're connecting the beginning and the end of the line so that you get your marching ants. So I released it and it automatically created this selection. So again, I'm going to the add layer mask, and I'm going to create the mask for that selection. Okay, and that was for the lasso. And let me just keep these in the order that I'm going. Now, another tool that we can use from the options bar with the quick selection, or the object selection tool active, or frankly any of the selection tools, but since it's active, that's what I'm going to use, is this object finder, which is relatively new to Photoshop, and it's right over here on the options bar. To use it, you would click the little box to the left, and so you get that check mark. And what happens is, did you see it? This little icon here starts spinning when it's detecting the objects in your image. And again, this is an automated tool. Once it stops spinning, you can start hovering over your image. So it saw this as one of the objects, and I guess this is just too much going on, so it was confused and doesn't see an object there. But it does detect our deer, our grazing deer. So with this object finder overlay active on the subject that we want, we left click inside, and you can see, now let me take it off so you can see, it's also created the marching ants selection of the deer. I typically leave this object finder turned off because I don't want it always processing in every image and then seeing all the overlays. So once I use it, I tend to like to turn it off. Okay, so this is with the object finder. We're going to make the mask that was generated by that selection. And I'm going to label this so that we know which was which. And let me, since we did that one third, let me drag that up to the top. Okay, so now that we have our three different automated selections made from the options bar using mode and using the object finder with our object selection tool active, now we can try to decide which of these made the best automated selection and see if we have to make any more like quick selection tool like we did before corrections, or if we're going to be okay just the way we are. So let's look at the masks and see what we got. And to view the mask, I'm clicking on Alt and clicking on the mask. Okay, so this is what the mode rectangle produced. And you can see we got our deer a little bit soft looking, and just because I know it's in the image, I know that this is actually a leaf down here, this little protuberance below his chin. So just keep in mind and sort of keep an eye on this part of the mask here as we look at the different selections to see which one is best, because they may change from tool to tool. All right, this next layer we use the Lasso tool under Mode. So watch the deer. So you can see it's a little bit different. It looks like with this Lasso tool, it's crisping up the edges a little bit from what the rectangle selection did. Okay, so that's actually a little better, even though we still have this leaf down here. And then now let's, again, looking over here, I'm going to click on the mask for the object finder. Much better. So this really doesn't need any finessing or cleaning up with the quick selection tool, because we've got much cleaner edges to the deer and to his antlers. It's removed that leaf that's on the ground in front of him. So let me get rid of, turn off the mask for that, and let's turn off the eyes for these two, the rectangle and the lasso, because for this particular image, the object finder did a lot better job. Now that's not to say that's going to happen for you every time, so that's why I experiment. You try the different automated tools, they're nice and fast. You won't be talking through it like I am, so you can experiment and see which one will produce the cleanest selection for you that will leave you the least extra work to do. So one of the things I said up front is that making selections can help you in the sense that it can also create an invisible barrier that you won't be able to brush over. So if you want to make modifications or paint in an area or do something like that, you won't be painting. And see, you could see where it would be hard with your paintbrush tool. So let me activate the brush tool just so it's over here on the toolbar. So we can see that. I mean, it would be hard to be brushing in between all the antlers and all this stuff and not getting into the edges of the deer. So let me again make my selection active, make a new layer, and I'm going to pull this layer up to the top just so we can demonstrate how having a selection can be a barrier so that you can paint a lot more broadly than you could without the barrier there. And I'm going to make a copy of my object finder mask with Alt or Option pressed and drag up to this layer, release. Okay, now if I want to paint some fog into the background and we want to use this selection as a barrier, well, right now we'd be painting on the deer because that's what's white. You have to have what you want to be painting on the white color. So with our mask active, and the white frame is around it. Oops, have to get rid of my selection there, sorry. With the mask active, you go down and click invert, and now we won't be painting on our deer, we will be painting on our background. Okay, so now I will go back to this layer and just so you can see where the selection is. Okay, come back to this layer. All right, so we want to brush with the brush tool. If we're brushing in fog, we want to be sure that we are brushing with white. We don't want to put in a black fog because our foreground color needs to be white. We want to be sure that our image icon is active and has the white frame around it. We're on the brush tool. We come over and let's just pick, I don't know, something here that looks like fog. Okay, and we definitely don't want to be painting fog with an opaque white. So with our opacity, we want to reduce that by a lot just to get a sense of fog coming in. And same thing with flow. We want the flow really low in the options bar for the brush tool. And then we'll just start painting. Oops, I didn't. There we go. I got my mask active. Okay, here we go. Have to look at so many different things. Okay, so now I'm just going to roughly paint in some fog. And again, I'm not trying to make this pretty. I'm just trying to show you that as much as I brush in fog around here, with that mask that was made from the selection of the deer, it becomes a barrier and we will not be able to paint over that deer because he's in black and the background is white. So the only place we can be brushing is with the brush in the background area because that's revealed as white. So we could make, again, other changes in this image too if we wanted to just keep going, but for now I think that's enough just to show how that can be used. So at this point here, let me just turn back off some of these or set these tools back to the defaults, so in case we need to use them for any other demos I'm doing here, we don't have the wrong things set up. Okay, we got the brush tool active. This is good. Gonna come back to our selection tool here. Okay, and let's now go on. So far we just saw how to use automated selection tools that were on the toolbar. So we worked with the object selection tool and we worked with the quick selection tool, which is nested under it. So now we're going to see some more tools that are in the select menu. So moving on to the next image, let's see how this one works. So this is cherry blossoms against a blue sky, and I'm going to drag this down and duplicate the layer to work on. Okay. So this select tool that I'm going to show you is up here in the select menu. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you that you can select the subject. So let's say in this case we wanted to select this subject, which is the flowers on the sky, and we want to change their color. So we would go up to Select, Subject. Okay, select menu, come down to Subject. And when Photoshop creates an automated selection, here's what we get. So again, this is Select, Subject. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did in the earlier examples. Going to come down and add a layer mask. And so that layer mask is created from the active selection of marching ants. Okay. Then we're going to try something else here and see what works best on selecting this subject. So next, remember we had said that with our object selection tool active, we can try the select subject in the cloud because it's supposed to do more detailed results, and this is a pretty detailed image with all those little tendrils and those flowers and everything. So let's click on the cloud option and then left click on the words select subject and let Photoshop think. There we go. So now that's created a selection for that too. We'll left click to create a mask from that, and this was the cloud selection. Okay, let me move that up because we did that second. And then let's try another option that's automated. So sometimes when you have a really intricate kind of a subject like this, it's easier to select the opposite than the subject. So in this case we have a completely solid blue sky, and even if you had a close to solid blue, it may be easier and faster to select the blue, which is a lot cleaner to select than it is to try to select all the little intricate details of this set of flowers, or this branch of flowers for Photoshop. So let's experiment and see what happens. If we go back to our select menu up here in the upper left, click on that, and come down to select sky. So that's, and just click and release. And now let Photoshop do its thing. So now what it's done is you can see that the selection line is around the outside. So it's selected around the outside and around the outside of those flowers and around the outside here and on the around the outside of these flowers. So rather than selecting the flowers themselves, Select Sky has selected the blue area around the sky. So let me again make a mask from that. And this is Select Sky. All right. Let me drag that up. Okay, so now maybe what we can do is try to compare these and see how they worked out, just like we did with the previous image. So I'm going to activate the masks, and this was Select Subject from the Select menu here, Select Subject. Okay. And I mean, it looks a little blobby. We don't see all those nice tendrils and the things that we can see when we're on the image of it, those flowers. So that's not the greatest selection, using Select Subject for this image. And then we use the cloud-based, more detailed view option for this next mask. So it's a little better, you can see. So look at the mask as I switch from Select Subject, which looks kind of mutant, and abstract, I guess is a nice way to say it. And then the detailed cloud selection method is getting a lot more of the flowers than Select Subject did, but we're still missing a lot of those little tendrils. So now let's see what Select Sky from here produced on this mask, so that we're comparing apples to apples. Let me, with this mask active, come down and do an invert. And look at this, how great this is, because we selected the blue and then reversed it. In other words, inverted it. It was a lot easier and cleaner and faster for Photoshop to figure out what to select with the all blue, and then give you a much more accurate selection for the object by just then doing an invert. So that worked out pretty well with that. So I'm going to look at the image here. Okay, so again, one of the things I said right up front is by making these kinds of selections, it gives us the flexibility to alter parts of the image. So I'm going to create another layer by dragging my background layer down to the duplicate layer there, and then I'll drag this up to the top. And let's say we want to change the background here. I mean, so now we've got our selection, and maybe that's not the look you're going for with that bright blue. So again, we can use our selection that we've converted to a mask. We don't have to start all over again selecting. I'm going to press the Alt key option on a Mac, click and drag up to that layer. And let's say that I want to replace this blue sky with black, so it looks like if I was out taking pictures and I put a nice black card behind it, but I forgot to bring one with me, and I want to do that. So if we want to affect the sky, what do we need to do? We need to be sure that on the mask, with it active with the white frame around it, we invert it. So that's why we have keep copies, so we can play with that. Go to your Properties panel, click Invert, and now we've got our background white, so we can change it. Come and click on your image icon, and let's say I want to, as I said, I want to use black. So come down to the adjustment layers, and I'm going to use a solid color. So let's go click on solid color, and yes, I want to use black, so I will click OK. Now, that kind of hid your image, didn't it? So what we want to do is copy the mask again. And so we're Alt, drag up, replace layer mask, And voila! So now all the mask is allowing is for the background to be filled with that black, and the flowers are not affected. Now you can see that you've still got a little traces of blue in here, and there certainly are ways that you can fix that too. In fact, why don't I just show you quickly, but it's not part of selection, so let me do this and let me see if this will work. So Hue Saturation layer. And I don't know if we need the layer mask or not for this, but let's just try it. Okay, so with the hue layer, we're going to, with our little tool active here, click on some of that blue, and what it'll pull up in your properties panel is the cyan. So the color you want to get rid of is the cyan. So I'm going to drag my saturation all the way down. Yeah, I'm going to get rid of this mask because I don't think I need that here. Let me get rid of that. We're going to drag that saturation all the way down, but we still have hints of gray in there, so we're going to drag this down here a little bit too. I goofed this up here. Sorry, let me throw that out and try again here. So we're going to add a hue saturation layer. We're going to just work with the cyans. We're going to drag the saturation down, and we're going to drag the lightness down to black so that there we go. Sometimes it's too many different layers going on here. So now we've gotten rid of the cyan by specifically targeting the cyans in a hue and saturation layer. So we have the flowers on a nice clean black background. Okay, so now we can go on to the next selection tool from the select menu. And we're going to use this image here. Let me see here. A, B, C, D. There we go. Okay. And it's an image from the Day of the Dead celebration. So let me duplicate that. And it's a pretty busy image. And what I want to focus on and have my viewers focus on is this area right in here. So primarily her face and the flowers framing her face, perhaps the fact that her hands are framing her face, maybe a little bit of this crown, but it's kind of busy and this background is very busy. So as a photograph, it's like your viewer doesn't really know where to look. So if you want to draw attention to a specific area, you can use selections as a way to pick the area that you want to work with and then make the adjustments that are appropriate for what you want to achieve with your image. And in this case, I want to brighten this up and draw more attention to this area. The trouble is that this doesn't have any nice clean edges like the previous images that we worked with, and so it will be a lot harder to work with either the object selection tool or with the quick selection tool. So what we want to try to work with in this example is something a little bit different. Let's try working with colors and see if colors will help us narrow down the parts of the image that we want to work on. So let's go up to the select menu and come down to this option called color range that's under the select menu, and click on that. And what comes up is this options panel, or this panel for color range with a variety of choices in it that you can make. My preference is to use sampled colors for the kind of work I do, but there's a little down arrow. So if you want to work with colors, just so you know, if you want to work with specific colors, you can pick the colors from the menu here and just click on the one you want. If you want to work with tonal ranges like highlights, midtones, or shadows, you can select that. If you do a lot of portrait work, you can select skin tones, but this isn't a skin tone, so I'm going to stick with sampled colors for this example. I don't do a lot of portrait work, so I leave detect faces off. I do leave localized color clusters checked on, And I check that I want my selection preview, which is this area right here, as a black matte. There are other choices, but I like black matte because to me it's the closest to looking like what a mask looks like. So I want to see what the mask is going to look like that I'm going to generate, and that's why I prefer black matte. I also want to be working so I see the selection, so I keep this active. What we have here is a slider called fuzziness, and what this slider does is it lets Photoshop know how many ranges of highlights or brightness to work with in your image. So the higher up the number, the more ranges of brightness that the selection tool will be able to grab as you're working with this tool. I just leave range here, but sometimes you can use trial and error to see if the range will give you more flexibility. But for me, I found that you can see if you lower the fuzziness, you get less of the image. And if you increase the fuzziness, more of the image is picked up in the selection. So for my image, since I'm trying to just frame her face, I'm going to try to stay pretty much in this area here. So the white areas are what will give me the ability to brighten her face. So I'm going to stay in that range. Now, perhaps I didn't pick up everything I wanted to in that selection from the fuzziness. That's what you use these little eyedropper tools for over here. So I start with the initial basic eyedropper, and if the color I want to brighten up and be able to work with is this color here, I left click there, and you can see it's picked up more of that color. To add to the selection, we use the plus eyedropper. So let's be sure we get more of her cheeks and her chin. I want to be sure I'm getting some of this flower around her face. Now it might be getting a little bit too far out into the rest of the image that I said I didn't want to do by clicking on that. So let me lower the fuzziness a little bit so we don't pick up too much. And another way to reduce what's being picked up then is with the minus eyedropper. That will take away from the color selection. Okay, let's get rid of some of this. I like her hands being framed. So for me, this seems to be capturing an area of the image that I want captured so that I can make adjustments to the woman. So I've used the color range sampling tools, starting with the basic one, adding to the selection with the plus, taking away from the selection that's generated with the minus, adjusting the fuzziness to help decide how much brightness is picked up in the sample. Once we get it where we want it, you click OK. Alright, and that generates our marching ants on this selection. And again, in order to convert that to a mask, we click on the Add Layer Mask. And you can see it looks very much like what we had in the Select Color Range panel. So that's just what I wanted. So we get that there. Okay. So we were able to select her. So now, as I said, my goal is to brighten her up. So let's click on here and let's brighten her with a brightness adjustment layer. So we're clicking on an add adjustment layer on this little icon that looks like a circle with a line through it, and then I clicked on brightness to get that. Okay, I'm going to copy the mask, Alt and drag up to the layer mask, and yes, we want to replace it because that's what we want to work on. The white areas are what's going to be affected. Click on the icon for brightness, and in your properties panel, since I want to brighten, I'm going to pull the brightness up to the right. Okay, and that might be a bit much, so let me come down a bit. Yeah, that's better. So we've got brightness, but we're not blowing out the details in her face. And if we want to add some contrast to her face too, we can do that in this same tool. Come down to the Properties panel, or up to the Properties panel, wherever yours is, and pull that to the right. If we want a little bit more, I tend to like to go extreme and then back it off. So we're still kind of blowing out of the face a little bit. And blowing out that flower. Yeah, that should be good about there. Okay, so now what we have is before and after using the color range selection mask. Okay, so now we still have this busy background that's kind of detracting from her. So let's duplicate that and drag this up here. Okay. And we want to now affect the background. So we're going to drag our mask, Alt drag up here, click to activate that mask and be sure the white frame is around it. Go to your Properties panel and invert because we want to work with the background. There we go. The background is now white. Okay. And now let's add, going to the Add Adjustment layer, let's lower the exposure. We got an exposure layer. Gonna drag this up. I'm going to turn this off because it's irrelevant here. Gonna click on the exposure to activate that. Go to your Properties panel, and since I want to darken it to get rid of the distractions, I can pull that down. That might be a bit much. Let's see here. Yeah, right about in there. So now you can see we've been able to use the select color range to select the area of the image that we want to have our users focus on, our viewers focus on, and then make adjustments like brightness, contrast to that area to draw attention to it. We were able to adjust the background by inversing or reversing the mask to get rid of distractions in the background. And we've gone from something like this, it's a little hard to sort out where your main point of interest is, to something like this, where you know where to focus. And you can look here, you can maybe look and see these other details in the image, but then you come back and your eye tends to rest more where the brighter part of the image is. So that was the last of the demos that I wanted to show for the tools. So we have covered the object selection tool, which is in the toolbar. We've covered some of the different options within the object selection tool that we can use, such as select subject and the object finder. We've shown how to use the quick selection tool, which is nested under the object selection tool to do some cleanup, or you can use it for initial selections too, whatever your preference. But I think it's faster nowadays, quite honestly, to start with these more automated tools and then use that quick selection tool for cleanup. We've also looked at select subject, sky, and color range from the select menu. So subject, sky, and color range to see how to make automated selections using those tools as well. So again, that's all I was going to cover with regard to the automated selection tools or semi-automated selection tools in Photoshop. I'm always interested in how to use tools for fine art photography, so that's what my interest is, and that's why I use the tools that I use. But I think you're going to find that if you work with these fairly automated selection tools, it's going to be considerably faster to work with them than with Photoshop's manual selection tools, and I hope that you can find ways to use them in your photo processing projects too. Take care.